Let's talk about state properties that we used in block properties. Hello everyone, this is Andy Reza. Welcome to the Mentor Code Lab. Now, in block properties, you remember that we had these state properties and every now and then we state it and put some values on that. But here's the question, what is a state properties? The state properties itself is actually a map of a key as the string and then a class instantiation of a state property. And it's a concurrent hash map. As you see, we have some helper methods for adding a horizontal facing and adding an axis. Let's take a look. Add horizontal facing is adding a property. Now, adding a property is this method. We will talk about that. And the property is a new state property with the horizontal facing as the delegate, and the default value is north. That's it. Add axis is adding a properties of type axis and then axis.y. Now, take note, we don't have the normal facing. I may want to add that. Then we had this add lit, and I told you that we want to have a new property, and that's properties.lit. Then we have add water loggable, that is properties.water loggable. And if you look at these properties, we have tons of things here that we can use. Now, we have Boolean properties like attached, berries, bloom, button, can summon, conditional, disarm, drag, enable. Oh, wait a minute. Enabled. Okay. Extended, hanging, falling, I, has, bottle, has, record, has, book, inverted, invol, lit, locked, natural, occupied, open, persistent, powered. Okay. Short, shrieking, signal fire, snowy, tip, triggered, unstable, waterlogged, horizontal axis, axis, up, down, north, east, southwest, facing. Okay. Then hopper facing, and then horizontal facing, flower amount, segments, orientation. Wait a minute, was it horizontal axis or horizontal facing? Okay, horizontal facing. Then we have orientation, block face, attachment, different connections that we can use. But why don't we have connections on top and bottom? I don't know. Wire connection. Oh, this should be for, Mojang. He is doing it for the dust, the redstone dust. But why didn't you make it complete? Now I have to override it for my cables. Okay, block half, then ages, some levels, some moisture, note, pickles, hover, and these are integer properties. So as you see, we have lots of properties. And if I honestly ever looked into this, I have this enabled and powered and locked that I can use. So I may want to add them on top of these, and let's do that. So add for, let's make it to do add hovered, enabled, and locked properties. Okay, so we have the add lit. It's just calling this with the default value of false, then the water loggable as false, and finally all of these are calling this overload. Actually, let's see, add property. Yeah, we are calling a new state property. So state property of any type, we say this dot if the properties already contains a value. So if we already defined it before, please throw an illegal argument exception. Tell us that, hey, we already have that, so why are you putting it 2 times? Other than that, just put that property delegate name as the key and then the property itself. For example, if we take a look at this loggable, this is the key. This is the name. So we get this name and we put it as the key inside our map and then the property itself. Simple, isn't it? Then we have the get property. Now, if we want to get the property, we want to get it from the name. Okay, we produce the name. If it is null, then we are throwing an exception that says, hey, the property with this name does not exist. Otherwise, we'll try to return the state property, and if we fail, we say that it's not the current type. Okay, now the type here is not being used, and I'm not sure why did he add it. We may want to say if state property dot actually if type dot is instant of get the type. If it's not that, then we want to throw an exception here again. Okay, so I'm not sure why did he send in the type, but this boils down to something like this. We say get property and the name is, I don't know, lit with the type of no properties dot lit, and this is not the type. So that get type, there we go. So instead of these, we could have an overload. Yeah, here we go. He's sending in the property, so we have an overload for that. Okay, let's take a look. I'm not sure if I want to keep it or not. Basically, this is redundant, but the overload actually has the get property that returns the state, the property. Oh, not the state property, but the property. Okay, and it says get the name, then return if we have the name inside our library, the property property name, as you see, and the type. So this is calling this overload, and then we want the delegate. The delegate is the property itself. If we didn't have the name, return null. Again, this type is not being used here, and I'm not sure why, but whatever. Then we have this contains. That's easy. That's really easy, straightforward. We just check if we have the name inside our map. Then we want to make sure if we have the property. So we're saying contains property, and instead of the name we produced, we are producing the property itself. So this is like we say contains property, properties.lit. So we can use it this way, basically. So we are producing the property, so we get the name of the property, then we do the search and get default value. Basically, we want to get the state property by this name and of course the class type. And as I said, this type is not being used, so whatever. And then when we have the property, we set the value for the default. Then we apply the default. For applying the default, we have the state and the property. All we are doing, we say that state.with for the property, use the default value. And this is like setting the default value for the facing horizontal to be the north, stuff like that. Then we have applied default just for the state. If the state equals null, return null. Otherwise, for each property inside the property's value, we put the state and apply the default for the state. This will cause applying every default value on every property that we have. Okay, so we can do it in one go. And then we return the state. Finally, we add the builder, and this is a state manager builder. We call it builder. For each property, we get the values and we say builder.add, and I think it's for appending the properties here. That's our state property. However, if you recall, we are working with a map of state property. Now, what is a state property? State property is actually very easy. It's just a property with a default value. So it's a class that contains these two. We can instantiate it using the property and the default value. Then we can get the property itself, we can get the default value, and finally we can set the default value. Nothing really complex here. Now, if I want to add my own stuff, both to the block properties and to state properties, because remember here we have this lit, has lit property, and with the flag and default lit. If I want to have things, for example, like the powered, if we take a look, let's start with enabled. So we have to add this, and we say add, what was the call? Enabled. Okay, enabled. All we are doing, we say that, hey, we want the enabled, and by default, the enabled should be true. The block should be enabled. And if we have this, notice that we are not producing any variables here, but here we want to have 3 more calls on top of the lit. So I will drop them down. I will add them here. So has enabled property, we call it has enabled property as true, has enabled property, and this is has enabled property. If has enabled property, previous called add enabled. Now default enabled with default enabled is set property, and here is the name, so we have to copy it from here, and this is the default, actually default, yeah, enabled, and that's it. So now I added enabled as a possible property to this whole situation. And if I want to have more like powered or locked, it's just copy pasting this and the other one. So this is add, I think it's locked first. Yeah, I will copy the locked from here, so I will not go back and forth. Locked, it's the locked, and the default value should be false. Now I will copy these 3, duplicate them, and we start with this one. Has locked property. This is has locked property, and the default value should be false here. Actually, no, it's true. So has locked property, has locked property. This is has locked property. Enable add locked property, and finally default locked, and this is the locked with default locked, and that's it. We added our locked, and finally it's powered. So for the powered, we will duplicate the locked, and we call it add powered, and this is the powered, and again by default it's false. So all I had to do is, this is 1, 2, 3, duplicate, and this is powered. So has powered, has powered, has powered, this is add powered, and this is the default power. And finally, set default value for the powered with the default power. If you want any other property that is not Boolean, and for example, it's int property for, I don't know, whatever, you have to change the type of the default value here. And that's it. You just copy paste everything, and you have to change the default value here and the default value here. You know, it's by default true or false here, but If it's int property, then you need to produce an int property here, okay? And that's it. Basically, I think the most use cases upside none. It doesn't have down. What? Okay. Anyway, the most use cases for you would be Boolean properties, maybe the enum direction axis or enum direction itself for the horizontal or the facing. By the way, you notice that I'm not producing the facing right now. We have the horizontal. Let's add the facing. So that's add facing, and this is properties.facings, and that is direction north. Then here we have the horizontal facing. This one has 3 overloads again. So I will just Control C them and put my overloads here. And this has facing and has facing, width has facing, and default facing here. So this has facing, add facing, and finally default direction, default horizontal direction, and this is default direction. So actually both of them are at not property facing and horizontal facing. Both are okay. Okay, we don't need this two times. So this is just the default direction for the facing, okay? And if you notice, the facing and horizontal facing are both handling the facing, okay? So when we are setting the direction, we are setting it on the facing. I think that's the case. So that's it. I think that's finished. Hopper facing is different. If you want to, you can add as many things as you want. Orientation, for example, you are producing orientation. And if you notice, add facing, default facing, for example, is asking for direction. If you want the orientation here, you will ask for orientation class. Okay, so down, east, down, north, down, down, up, west, up, east, up, north, up. Okay, whatever it is, I don't understand it. Anyway, yes, you can look into use cases. But here's the thing, thankfully the facing and the horizontal facing don't produce their own problems here. And if you look at their use cases, for example, well, other than my own mod, for God's sake. So if you look, for example, for the horizontal facing block, let's open the facing block actually. You see that it's having facing, it's just not appending it. Basically, this one was appending it. So it has property facing and it's just appending the properties, okay? So it's not adding it to any naming, and the naming is what we are using, okay? So if you want to, you can choose different namings for these two, especially on the state property, okay? I think, actually, wait a minute, for the horizontal facing, we are looking for default direction on the facing. Yeah, that's okay, because I know we will handle it inside the block. I think it's not related to what type of facing we are using. So yes, we added the facing, and that's it. Basically, we have covered almost all the things that I wanted to have in these properties. And now that I think about it, when we have the enabled and powered, we don't need this property ourselves, and we need to somehow replace it with one of the things, either the powered or the enabled. I think we will go with the lit, and that means that we just can use the offered quicker model and not our modeling. We will take a look at that at some point. Right now, we have our properties and the state properties for our blocks. However, we are not done yet, because after block properties, we have block entity properties, and we want to take a look at that. Now, block entity properties is something that is really interesting, and the way we will implement it is even more interesting. So stay tuned for the next video.
If you like these videos, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on that bell so that when I publish a new video, you will get informed. Have fun, everyone. Bye.